A waste of time, a cursed waste of time, he snarled, crumbling bread onto the table. Suddenly, he pointed a finger straight at Leverbelt. We should have been given a unit of soldiers. We should be commanders. Don't crumble the bread, Tohimon, Leverbelt said calmly. He was always calm. Think of the people who would be overjoyed to eat even what you are wasting now. So what? Muttered Kimilzil. One day I'll be emperor, and I'll be able to roll around in bread. I'm the son of the emperor, teacher. What do I care about respect for bread? I'm not going to bake it or grow grain. That's what peasants are for. I'll be taking care of making sure that they can grow it at all. You should be preparing us for battle for the glory of the empire. That is our destiny, and instead you make us waste time taking care of animals. Any shepherd can do that. Are we supposed to play flutes for them or what? The greatness of the empire is precisely in the bread, Tohimon. When it's gone, what will all the glory of the empire be worth? You have to eat just like a shepherd. You are only human, just like him. I am different kind of human. I am the emperor's son. No one puts shepherds on thrones. It would make more sense if you had given us 100 infantrymen each. Leverbelt carefully wiped his bowl clean with a piece of bread and leaned back on the bench, pulling out his pipe and a horn filled with herbs. Do you remember when I taught you to swim, Tohimon? He asked. Kimmerzil froze, his jaw clenching in anger. He was as afraid of water as a kitten. He was the last to learn to swim when Chagai and I were already splashing around in the lake, frolicking like little seals. He never forgot that humiliation. You cried, Tohimon, when the water reached your chin and you had to submerge your face. Your brothers would sit down to breakfast with nothing but loincloths on, already eager to rush to the pond, while you had to step aside because the thought of the swimming made you sick. And so what? Snarled Kimilzil, shaking with rage, especially since Chagai started to snicker. I overcame my fear. You yourself said that every man must know his limits, and only fools fear nothing. That is true, Leverbelt admitted. You overcame it, and I was prouder of you than of your brothers, for whom it came easily. But what would have happened, young tiger, noble prince, if I had taught you to swim the way the barbarians from the bitter water delta do, by simply throwing you into the sea? You would have drowned. Their children drown sometimes too. They believe that everyone is born for the sea, just as you believe that everyone is born to be a commander. So if you want, one day, to rule people who have dreams, souls, and loved ones, first show me when you can rule over animals. On that day, I couldn't wait for breakfast to end. I tore off pieces of bread, dipping them in paste, followed by pickled vegetables, and downed the palm juice in one gulp. As soon as Leverbelt allowed it, I rushed to the garden. A boat with a flag as yellow as the sun waited for me at the stern, along with a basket of food, one for me, and another filled with dura seeds, nuts, and strips of dried meat, all for my smartlings. In my pavilion, I had a warm coat, a basket of coals because it was still early spring, a folding chair with a backrest, and a table. There were also a basket of food and a jug of palm juice. That's it. I had also my yellow flute tucked inside my tunic. The rules were that I couldn't help my animals in any other way than by playing the flute. I couldn't touch or do anything myself. However, on that first day, I didn't play a single note. I just watched what my smartlings were doing. I was terribly tempted, but I made a decision that I needed to get to know them first. Until noon, they just seemed amusing to me. These were creatures that couldn't sit still for a moment. They were constantly frolicking, tumbling and chasing each other, or scouring the ground with comical seriousness in search of treats. I watched them intently, sipping small sips of palm juice through a reed, curious about the unnatural abilities that the charm spot's power, combined with the master of animals' art, had infused in them. I didn't notice anything particularly unusual, except that sometimes they would use a stick to dig an insect out of the log or reach something, and I also saw them break open a mussel shell with a stone held in the paw, placing another stone underneath. But I had never seen smartlings in the wild, and I had no idea if they sometimes did the same without the charm spot's power and similar things. My pavilion was raised on pillars and surrounded by a wooden platform, so I could see almost the entire island from it, except for the area where clumps of shrubs, the crowns of blossoming plum trees, or reed beds obstructed the view. I spent a lot of time there. I knew that my island was 180 paces long and 90 across. I would walk around it, sometimes sitting on my folding chair and watching the little creatures. They gave the impression that they didn't see me at all. They dug in the ground and built domes of clay connected by tunnels that looked like thick tree roots, among which they erected towers resembling termite mounds or tall chimneys. At the top of each, almost always, one smartling perched, sticking its little head out and keeping watch for danger. In the following days, the little creatures greeted me when I arrived on the island. As soon as I disembarked from the boat, they came running from all directions, standing on the shore in a semicircle, staring at me with their black, beady eyes, and then they began to greet me, wagging their short tails and making a series of twitchy head movements that looked like a comical bow. On the third day, I started by scattering some food for them, and then, for the very first time, I played the flute. The animals rushed to my pavilion but stopped when they saw the pile of seeds and pieces of dried meat lying there. After a moment, the bravest smartling poked its snout out, began sniffing the treats, and finally grabbed a dried fruit from the top and started gnawing on it, sitting on its tail. Seeing this, the next smartling ventured out of the crowd, clearly encouraged, followed by another, and soon there was a huge group of animals in front of my pavilion, biting, fighting, and tumbling over each other among the orange dura seeds and pieces of meat. This was not what I wanted. Not at all. I raised the flute to my lips and played. I couldn't say which signals suggested by Master of Animals I was playing at the moment. I simply expressed what I felt and thought. And I wanted the creatures to calm down immediately before they killed each other. It took a while, but eventually the smartlings gradually stopped fighting, and they stayed still, with their heads raised and their piercing eyes fixed on me, some still lying entwined in a deadly embrace, others frozen in strange poses. I played for a while until the animals understood. They began to approach one by one, each taking some food in its mouth and some in its paws, and moving off to the side. It took quite a while, but eventually the smartlings had taken all the food I had scattered, and it turned out that a large group of them was left with nothing. I scattered a bit more to ensure that no smartling went hungry, but I soon realized that all of them had been actually fed, but some were coming back to the pavilion for more. I ordered them to go away and attend to their own business. Over the following days, I noticed with astonishment that my smartlings had completely stopped foraging for food or playing. They had even abandoned their villages and watchtowers, doing nothing but simply sitting around my pavilion, waiting for me to throw them some food. When I drove them away, they simply hid in the grass and among the bushes, watching my every move and waiting to see if I would give them something to eat or not. After a few days, their fur became matted, the young were thin, clinging to the mothers, and they just sat there, staring at me with beady eyes, but they had no intention of searching for insects and shoots on the beaches and in the grass as they had done before, as if they had forgotten how. The sight was terrible, and my heart bled to watch it, but I did not give them another bite. Then it occurred to me what I had always thought was the simplest thing in the world for a good ruler to do, that is, to ensure his subjects had enough to eat, didn't work as it should. I didn't want my smartlings to turn into creatures entirely dependent on the contents of my basket. I didn't understand why it had happened. I thought maybe the food tasted so good to them that now they didn't want anything else. But one day, they were weak from hunger and a few of them even died. They dragged their little bodies to the very edge of the veranda and laid them in the sand like a reproach. Seeing the poor creatures lying still like tawny, empty sacks, I felt tears in my eyes, but I didn't lift the lid of the basket. Instead, I took a flute and played them a song about hunger and the sad fate of a starving smartling, and immediately after, a song about the abundance of food hidden in the beaches and in the grass. It didn't do much. Only a few animals left the silent group waiting for my gift and started searching in the grass. I kept playing and added tones that spoke of the pride of a free smartling, capable of providing for itself and its young, and not dependent on anyone's mercy. Then I reached into the basket, secretly grabbed a handful of treats, and went to the nearest sandy beach, where I scattered them and buried them in the sand, then returned to the pavilion and continued playing the same melody. I played and played, swallowing tears, and when my throat was completely dry and my fingers ached, I saw that it was slowly starting to have an effect. Individual animals began to return to the meadow and to the beaches to dig insects out of the ground and pull mussels from the water. In the end, only a few animals remained, and when I stopped playing, they eventually left too. Afterwards, I sat down and thought for a long time what to do. I realized that with my flute and basket, I could not only rule over them, but just as easily kill them. The three creatures lying in front of my pavilion had died not just because of some traits of their own. In truth, they have been killed by my own stupidity. From then on, I played very cautiously. The lives of the creatures seemed to follow natural rhythm, and I was afraid to disturb them. However, They were very reactive to my music, and gradually my commands began to change them. The shape of their villages had changed. They were still dome-shaped mounds of packed clay, connected by tunnels and covered passageways, and they still had watchtowers rising above them, but I decided that they should be built in a plan of concentric circles, with radially arranged tunnels and burrows, so that it would be easier for the creatures to come and go. In the center, I instructed them to build a large dome with two levels. The upper level was to serve as a food storage area, and the underground chamber, large enough to hold all the animals, was to be used as a shelter. I came up with various ideas. I taught them to make enclosures from woven branches and set them in shallow coastal waters to form narrowing corridors ending in round basins, and then to herd various creatures, water insects, and small fish into them. Not everything I did made sense. Once I decided to divide them into groups and assign tasks. Some were to gather shoots, others to hunt, and still others to take care of the young. But it turned out that I was causing too much confusion in their lives, and in the process, I was taking away their usual enthusiasm. They became apathic and carried out my orders without conviction, until finally it became clear that everything was done poorly and much worse than without my improvements. The same happened when I made them store too many supplies. I thought they should bring all the seeds, fruits, and insects to me, and I would distribute them fairly. As a result, they only wandered around the fields and beaches, finding very little. They surrendered their finds because, under the flute's power, they couldn't defy me, but there was much less than before. It was as if they believed that whether they would be fed in the end depended not on their efforts, but solely on my whims. I also learned that I couldn't constantly give them orders with my flute. They needed time to do what they wanted. Otherwise, they too became apathetic and began to fall ill. In truth, I was constantly worried about whether the island could provide them with enough food. Master of Animals had hinted that in terms of starvation, the smartlings might kill and eat each other. I was determined not to let that happen. So I made them gather shoots and taught them to dry mussels and insects on stones. I knew that later, when the peak of summer passed, the most important resources would be nuts and plum fruits. Every few days, I received a basket of feed, which I secretly scattered in grass and buried in the sand. I was terribly curious about what my brothers were doing on their islands. From the upper platform of my pavilion, I could see both islands, but only as a clumps of trees and shrubs on the lake. I could see the flags fluttering above the distant pavilions, but not much more.